Welcome back to Arise News Hour. I'm Charles Aniagolu in London. Now let's continue with our extended coverage of the war in Ukraine. A short time ago, I spoke to Anthony Glees, Professor of Politics at the University of Buckingham and an expert on European affairs. I started by asking him about those reports that relations between Russian President Vladimir Putin and his top military men has become ever more strained.
I think it's both an important contribution and a highly plausible contribution from an extremely significant source. And it echoes what we in the United Kingdom learnt this morning was being said to an Australian audience by the Director General of GCHQ, the government's interception and spy centre in Cheltenham, namely that it's increasingly clear that the Russian forces in Ukraine were very badly prepared, that they lacked the basic things you would need in order to mount a particular operation that involved the speedy capitulation, in effect, of Ukraine, and the view that Putin's own intelligence community, we're talking about military intelligence, the GRU, as well as the political intelligence people, the FSB and the SVR, their sort of foreign wing, they were too afraid to tell Putin exactly what the problem was, whereas Western intelligence was able to exploit the communications that were going on by the Russians between the Russian forces in Ukraine and in Moscow to come up with an assessment that is highly authoritative and highly significant, because it suggests that the war that Putin wanted to win is not being won by him, right, that he doesn't understand this, and that yes, he's still got the power to destroy and obliterate cities and, more importantly, the people who live in them with his missiles and bombs, but he's not winning.
So if President Putin isn't being fed the correct information about what's going on in Ukraine, what might that change operationally in terms of the kinds of decisions he might make, obviously bearing in mind that we have very little insight into the mind of Mr. Putin?
Yes, we do have very little insight. I think the first thing to say is that we didn't know whether Putin was mad and suicidal, or simply demented and not suicidal, whether he had a plan or he didn't have a plan. We now know from the intelligence, and our intelligence, Western intelligence, has been right about Ukraine from the very beginning of this. We do know that he believes he has a plan, that he is not suicidal, he doesn't want to throw nuclear weapons into the balance of this, but that if he cannot win that quick war that he wanted, he will spend treasure and blood in trying to win a war of attrition. And this would be consistent with what Russia has done elsewhere, in Chechnya and, of course, in Aleppo in Syria, where it has taken months to totally destroy, brick upon brick and life upon life, the people who are rash enough to oppose Putin's wishes. So what we would expect is not necessarily an escalation into the nuclear realm by Putin, because he's not winning, but rather more obliteration, more destruction, more lives lost.
And we've just heard the head of NATO, Jens Stoltenberg, saying that Western intelligence confirms that Russia is not keeping its pledge to scale down its military operations around Kyiv and northern Ukraine. Basically, they're not withdrawing. What they're doing is redeploying. Is there anything that NATO can do to help the Ukrainians?
Well, yes, I think there are some things that can be done. Yes, indeed. I think the first thing that can be done is to give Ukrainians all the weapons we can, and particularly batteries of Patriot missiles. These are missiles that can intercept incoming missiles, and we have other surface-to-air missiles that can bring down bombers in NATO, and these can be supplied to Ukraine, and it will be particularly important if this does indeed turn into a war of attrition, as Jens Stoltenberg, the head of NATO, implies. However, there's a second thing that we can do, and that is continue to tell Putin what will happen if he carries on with this disgraceful and disgusting war against the free people who only want to be independent. NATO and Jens Stoltenberg, prior to President Biden's visit to Europe, spent a lot of energy telling Putin what NATO was not going to do, stressing the fact, correctly, that Ukraine was not a member of NATO, and that therefore NATO's all-important Article 5, a war against one is a war against all, in so many words, that didn't apply. I think that encouraged Putin to believe that he could get away with murder as long as he made sure that no other NATO country was involved. Now, I don't think that was right. And so when Biden started, in effect, threatening Putin in Europe, that seems to have been an important development.
And that was European affairs expert Anthony Glees, a professor of politics at the University of Buckingham, talking to me earlier from just outside London.